Well, welcome everyone to the Medieval Institute this morning. My name is Thomas Berman. I'm the director of the Medieval Institute, and we're happy to have a good group of people here for one of our signature events, that is our Byzantine Studies Colloquium that we host for our Byzantine Studies Fellow at the end of that fellow's time here, and bring in scholars from outside to look at the work that is underway on the part of the fellow, and have the fellow give a presentation, and then the three visiting scholars will give a presentation. We'll have lunch in there somewhere, and these are usually really remarkably interesting events, and I'm sure this one will be. To introduce and to MC this event, I will welcome my colleague, Professor of Byzantine History and also kind of Islamic history, Alexander Weihammer, who will take over things from here. So, Alex.
Yes, hello. So I'm Alexander, the Haydn Family College Professor at the History Department. And so today we have our workshop on settlement, space, society in rural Byzantium. We had Mark Pawlowski here for 1 year now. You arrived in the spring semester, isn't it? Now in the fall semester, so this year is a little bit different in terms of schedule. And now over the next couple of hours we have a sort of fascinating discussion about village life, settlements, village communities. This is an important topic in Byzantine studies for many decades. The research started actually in the, we could say, first half of the 20th century with very basic work on village institutions, taxations, village organization on the basis of the written material that was available back then. And the whole field, of course, became very much revolutionized due to the fact that people started to do more and more archaeology, survey archaeology, and field work on villages. And this is quite a booming field with a lot of new material coming up in sort of all the mainlands of Byzantine culture, primarily Greece, Asia Minor, but also other parts of the Byzantine world. And so Mark is very much in the center of this research with his dissertation, which he finished in 2019 at UCLA under the supervision of Sharon Gaskell. And the title of his dissertation was Housing and the Village Landscape in Byzantine Mani, so the southernmost point, one of the southernmost points of the Peloponnese Peninsula. So in this dissertation, he did a sort of in-depth analysis of 2 villages that he found and examined there with all their physical remains, and did an analysis of settlement patterns, spatial organization of these villages. And now he's working on a monograph in which he tries to put this research into a larger context and draw conclusions about village organization, spatial organization of villages in a sort of broader comparative context in the Byzantine world, where that also draws in a lot of material coming from Asia Minor and from other parts of the Byzantine world. Mark then unfortunately will leave us quite soon, and but the good thing is that he has now a position, or will start a position at the University of Oklahoma, where we wish him a lot of luck with his new responsibilities, teaching Byzantine archaeology, I assume, and perhaps broader.
Classics, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and without further ado, I would call now Mark to start and listen to his thoughts.
Let's see if I can get this. Okay. All right. Thank you for that introduction. I want to just begin by thanking the University of Notre Dame as well as the Medieval Institute for providing me with the time and the resources over this past year. I also like to thank the director of the Medieval Institute, Tom Berman, the assistant director, Megan Hall, as well as Thompson Guster for all the help they provided, as well as Alexis Torrance, the chair of the Byzantine Studies Committee, and Alexander Byhammer for emceeing today's event. And of course, I'd like to thank us other speakers for agreeing to come to this, Theodore Neville, Pamela Armstrong, and Effie Athanasopoulos. So a lot of thank yous, but important as well. So today I'm going to talk about how my research has developed in my time here at the Medieval Institute and led to the present form of my manuscript. So my initial intention was to build upon my dissertation, which focused on domestic architecture and the built landscape of Byzantine villages in the Mani Peninsula. I wanted to expand my research to take a more synthetic approach to village housing throughout Byzantium, looking more broadly at villages and village houses. The object of the study seemed relatively straightforward, but I quickly found many issues that complicated how to approach the subject matter. Two fundamental points had to be grappled with before I could begin determining the body of evidence that would form the basis of my study. Those two issues were what a Byzantine village is, and perhaps even more fundamental, what is a house? So if I'm going to study Byzantine houses in the Byzantine village, I have to be able to classify the settlements where they are found. Looking at archaeological remains, there needs to be a standard by which houses are or are not included in the category of the village house. Defining the Byzantine village is surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, a very difficult question to answer because of the number of perspectives that we have to work with. We have tax and legal documents, saints' lives, and other written resources that provide the Byzantine perspective on what a village was. Often these views are from the state or other authorities, but hagiography provides a perspective that may contain a more nuanced understanding of rural life. Documents like the Farmer's Law and Marcian Treatise present a uniform understanding of the village that is not region-specific. From the view of the state, a village was a village, regardless of size, architecture, or economic focus. A generalized understanding was necessary for a uniform approach to tax assessment and extraction. This generalized view, though, mutes the many differences evident in the archaeological record for Byzantine villages. The material record presents a picture of significant variation in form and size of villages as well as domestic architecture. Further complicating the definition of the village is the terminology used for villages in the written record, as it is not used consistently. For example, in the 12th century Practica for the Cosmos Tierra Monastery, we have settlements that are referred to as both an estate, proastion, and as a village, a horion. We have a settlement of Cassandria in Macedonia that is referred to as a polyhenon, a small city or town in the 10th century, but its inhabitants are referred to as villagers, horiatai. Michel Kaplan has shown how the term for a settlement can change based on the presence of an official, such as a bishop, unrelated to the size or infrastructure of the settlement itself. If the term used of a settlement in the written record can change based on the presence of a built feature or an individual such as a bishop, what effect would that have on the archaeological remains that we see? If we had a village, illustrated here, of 30 houses that at one point in time has a fortification wall constructed around it, and then is subsequently referred to as a castron in the written record, should that affect how we classify and analyze the remains today? Does the creation of a wall require us to interpret the houses and the people who lived within them in a different way than we would have had before the wall was built? If the residents of the settlement maintain their same lifeways, farm the same lands, grow the same crops, pasture their animals in the same areas, and importantly, continue to live in their same houses, would it be improper to consider such a settlement as a village? If a village is given to a monastery and transformed into an estate, does it lose any essential character as a village? Even a village that is elevated to a bishopric, does this fundamentally alter the built environment and daily life of those that live there? And how quickly would such changes manifest, if at all? Villages identified archaeologically are often not identifiable in the written record, and even when they are, the references may be no more than a name. As ideal as it would be to understand settlements in terms that their contemporaries would have used, it is simply not possible in many cases. At the same time, it is important not to be arbitrary in the classification of settlements today. I'm not trying to deconstruct the concept of what a village is to the point where any settlement can be considered a village, a conclusion that would be highly problematic. But I need to contend with the issues that are present. So I decided to reorient my approach to the material. The study of the village is inherently the study of villagers. And we know from the written record that villagers can live in settlements with a variety of names, such as the villagers of Cassandria. I realized that I'm not just looking at village housing, but rather villager housing. Seemingly, there would be no distinction between these two categories, but from the Byzantine perspective, there was. This approach allows for a comparison of houses and settlements of people with mostly identical lifeways, regardless of the particular term used to identify the settlement where they live. At the same time, by embracing the elasticity given to the term villager we find in the written record, this approach is historical, representing the Byzantine perspective and not simply a modern one. If the study of the village is the study of villagers, perhaps the best way to understand the Byzantine villager is to examine where they lived, their house. But what to consider the house of the villager? Again, this seems like a simple enough idea, but looking across Byzantium, villager housing manifests itself in a variety of ways, and it becomes critical to have a working definition of a house that allows for consistency as well as comparison across regions if the goal is to have a more inclusive understanding of Byzantine housing. Limiting our understanding of the house to the four walls, we create an artificially constricted concept of the house that does not necessarily reflect its lived reality. For example, if we start with a simple single room structure, we may be able to readily identify this as a house based on fine contexts and other material. But if we have, in addition to the single room structure, an addition of an outbuilding like this, maybe perhaps this outbuilding is used for storage of agricultural produce or stabling of animals, should we consider these two distinct structures to be a single house? Or is the house the initial single room structure alone? If we rearrange the situation and place the original structure on top of the outbuilding, this could be readily understood as a single house. And indeed, the arrangement of living space on top of storage space is the most common arrangement we find of houses in the medieval Peloponnese. Examples are found in the Mani, as well as throughout other settlements of varying size and status. What if we take the two rooms and place them side by side? Is this a single house now, or do the rooms need to communicate with each other in order to be considered a single unit? If we keep the rooms separate and connect them by a small wall or enclose them together with a courtyard, there are many possible configurations of rooms, but regardless of their layout, their use and function in the everyday life of the villager is largely the same. If we look at the first example and say that only this original structure is the house, and that the outbuilding is unrelated to our understanding or interpretation of the house, we're creating a false dichotomy. If we wanted to compare then that original structure to the two-floor house, we would determine that the single room structure lacks storage space. But storage space is not absent. Clearly it was a fundamental aspect of the lived experience of the villager, integral to their daily life. All these examples of the arrangement of different rooms should be understood as a single house, regardless of their architectural configuration of space. This better reflects the lived reality of the villager and their day-to-day life. It also allows for a constructive comparison of houses across settlements and regions that have very different architectural manifestations of the house. So I suggest a disarticulation of the house from its architectural frame. Understanding the village house is not simply a study of architecture, it is a study of space. Regardless of the architectural elaboration of a villager's house, it would contain the same functional spaces. By focusing on space, we can examine similarities and differences in villager housing across regions. It allows for comparison of the megalithic architecture of the Mani to the spolia-heavy masonry of Pergamum to the rock-carved dwellings of Cappadocia. Crucial to the understanding of villages and villager housing is their built context. Isolated examples of housing are important to observe the variation of house forms found in Byzantium, but it is impossible to understand them in relationship to the settlement in which they were placed. By focusing on housing and settlements that are surveyed or excavated to the extent that they provide a clear indication of the built landscape of the settlement, a better understanding of their houses is possible. Being able to identify other built features such as churches or threshing floors, even workshops, provides the everyday context necessary for interpreting the built remains. From the examination of houses in their settlement context, I was struck by the evidence of village organization. To lay out the settlement and construct houses and other features required a communal effort. And I'm not suggesting the idea of a village commune where villagers selflessly work together in order to form the village. It is clear that some houses are better positioned in settlements than others, either being placed on more level ground or near important resources. There are also houses that are much larger than others. The difference in scale amongst houses is beyond what one would expect from the simple variation found when houses are created without drawn plans or measurements. For example, House 11 on the left in the village of Marathos has approximately 48 square meters of internal space between its two floors in its first phase of construction. House 5 in the same village has only about 28 square meters of interior space in its initial phase. Clearly, the occupants of House 11 were able to mobilize greater resources, most importantly labor, in the construction of their home. Economic and social differentiation is visible in the built environment. And this variation in scale is not unique to Marathos or the Mani, but a scale of housing is visible in settlements across Byzantium. The settlement at Pergamum and the settlements in Cappadocia all provide examples. Social differentiation within the village suggests that competition existed amongst villagers. The study of provincial authority by Leonora Neville has shown the importance of constructing and maintaining authority in the countryside. Within the village, authority would not rely on official titles or state-sanctioned status. In fact, competition amongst villagers may have been more a part of everyday life than previously thought, because claim to authority or status in the village could be quite tenuous. An affluent villager would not have much of a cushion if there was a bad harvest or an enemy incursion in the countryside. One poor decision, overstepping boundaries, could quickly lead to complete dissolution of one's status. The social dynamics of the village, evidenced in material and written record, require that there be social space within the settlement. There are formal and informal spaces that allow for interaction amongst villagers, as well as with outsiders, state officials, and others. Presumably any space within the village could be the location for a periodic encounter. For example, walking through a neighborhood to get water from a cistern, as illustrated here. Interactions could readily occur. I'm focused, however, on investigating if there are identifiable spaces within the village that could regularly be used for social interaction and, importantly, the organization of the village that is seen in both the written and material record. This organization requires a formal space to exist. The community needs to come together, discuss issues, possible solutions, and select representatives to handle disputes on behalf of the community. Such actions cannot occur in the brief encounters of a few individuals at relatively random times. Importantly, the house does not appear to have been the location where meetings could regularly occur. In large part, this is due to the small size of the living space in the village house. Individuals or small groups could, of course, physically meet in this area, but this is a very private space of the house. Non-family members entering the space created an environment that was ripe for transgression. We find two examples in the life of St. Lazaros of Montcalessian, where traveling monks stay inside a villager's house, and in both instances, they have sex with the woman who lives there, creating not just issues for the monks, who should be celibate, but also further transgressions in the case where one of the women was married. Even if the space existed within the house to accommodate a large meeting, there would still be issues with gathering at a villager's home. The village community deciding to meet at a particular villager's house to discuss issues would be a tacit admittance that this villager was the most important member of the community. From the written and archaeological record, however, a villager of unquestioned status above the rest of his community is rare. Even amongst the large courtyard complexes in settlements like Ajiksaray and Çamlıkalesi in Cappadocia, that certainly belong to more elite individuals, a clear hierarchy between them is difficult to establish. Competition amongst leading households of a village make it difficult to determine at whose house the community should meet. The situation would be ripe for conflict within the village, a type of conflict that not having a set hierarchy was intended to avoid. Another space then is necessary for the community to gather. The meeting place for the village then needed to be a relatively neutral location. It had to be a space that was not overtly owned by a particular individual. This is where it's important to examine the entire built environment of the village. Looking at the house alone or in a vacuum does not afford the possibility to understand the fundamental elements of daily life for the villager. Within the built environment, the space that stands out as the communal meeting area for the village is the outside space framed by the village church. The church was the only form of public architecture usually found in the village. It also belonged to the community. It was a more or less neutral location that was free from the political issues of meeting at someone's home. The space in front of the church served as an important social space where the community could gather and discuss issues. That the space outside or in front of a church would be an important social space is not a novel idea. For the castron of Yaraki in Laconia, Anna Marie Samatu and Rosalia Christodoulopoulos have suggested that the space identified in front of the Church of St. George would serve as the important communal meeting space for the community. But we also see the architectural framing of space in other locations as well, perhaps best illustrated by the open plaza in front of the Palace of the Despot in Mistras. Here the community could gather to debate and listen to public lectures. These social dynamics must have existed at a different scale within the village, allowing for the creation of a built environment that is observed in the archaeological record and the organization evident in the written record. So this brief overview of the development of my research here provides an outline for my intervention into the study of Byzantine houses and settlements. The organization and creation of villages, as well as their evolution over time, provides insights into the agency and power of villagers in Byzantium. Not simply passive actors in the development of Byzantine history, villagers were a fundamental element of Byzantium that is best understood through a careful study of their impact in the material record. Thank you.